favor.
Ya, grabando.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys.
Yo ya estoy preparando el Facebook Live.
Okay.
Apagué mi cámara, voy a apagar mi audio también, ¿no?
Ajá.
Sí.
Bueno. Good luck.
Sí, yo ya voy a apagar mi cámara, a ver. Ahí está.
Okay. All right. So welcome everybody to this webinar. And for the ones who are just joining us, and please, we ask you to mute your microphones, and your video is going to be turned off during the session. Please type your questions in my chat, that is Elizabeth Arroyo's private chat. At the end, we're going to have a Q&A session where your questions will be answered by our guest speaker. This session will be available on our YouTube channel after this session, and this session is going to be recorded. Okay, so today's topic and our guest speaker is going to talk about cultural diversity in the United States. And this webinar is part of a series of webinars. Yes, and we are from November 16th to November the 20th, celebrating International Education Week 2020. And this webinar is part, as I already said, about a series of webinars where we are going to be celebrating diversity and inclusion, where we'll be talking about how diversity and inclusion is celebrated in the United States and in United States universities. So welcome everybody. We also welcome Sandeep Paul, who is the Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Consulate General, Guadalajara. He is our guest speaker today, and we are very happy that he's been talking about this interesting and important topic. And I'd like to introduce Education USA to you. So Education USA is, okay, I'll say it in Spanish. Education USA es una red del Departamento de Estado de los Estados Unidos, a través de la cual promovemos la educación superior en los Estados Unidos. Asesoramos a potenciales estudiantes internacionales, ofrecemos información precisa, completa y actualizada, y apoyamos a las instituciones de educación superior de Estados Unidos en sus esfuerzos de reclutamiento de estudiantes internacionales. Okay, so I'd like to introduce you, Sandeep Paul, who's going to be sharing this interesting topic with all of us. Thank you, Sandeep, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Cultural diversity, or just plain diversity, is an issue that is something very dear to me. I think it is an important issue, a very important issue, just as important as civil rights in the United States were back in the 60s. It is that important, especially with some of the divisiveness that we have seen recently, both in the United States and in other countries. I think this is an area where some people talk about diversity without really understanding what diversity is. So I'm going to broaden the frame, because I think cultural diversity is only part of diversity. And so why don't I move to the next slide here. According to Merriam-Webster, the American English Dictionary, as opposed to the British English Dictionary, which is Collins, I think, is one example. Diversity actually has the word inclusion in it. And it means the inclusion, as you can see on the screen, of different types of people. And when we say people, we're talking about groups, we're talking about organizations, we're talking about a country, we're talking about society in general. So when we do talk about diversity and we look up the word diversity in the dictionary, in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, you will find the word inclusion. However, when people speak about diversity, they fail to understand that that is what we mean when we speak about diversity. Why don't we go to the next slide? Here, as you can see, is a picture or a representation of the American, they call it the Great Seal of the US government. And as you can see there, there's a scroll in the mouth of the bald eagle there that has some Latin words in there. And it says, E pluribus unum, which in English, translated, would mean out of many, one. Or you could switch that around and you could actually say one out of many. So it works both ways. And this has been the motto of the United States, you know, from the very beginning, from when the United States was only 13 of the original colonies. If you look at the seal, you will see there, we have 13 stars and 13 stripes, precisely to represent the original 13 colonies of the United States. Let's go to the next slide. So when we talk about diversity, not just cultural diversity, but diversity writ large, we're talking about three types of diversity. And the three are pretty easy to picture. The first one, of course, is internal. What is our internal identity? What are we born into? And when we say we're born into it, it's something that for the most part, and I say for the most part because there are one or two exceptions, it is unchangeable, right? This is something you were born with and you can't change this. And I'll go into detail about that just shortly. The second one, of course, is your external, the external type of diversity. And that is that's what is heavily influenced and controlled by us. So it is changeable as opposed to internal, right? So this is the external type of diversity. And the last one, of course, are the factors that we observe, feel, and experience. And as a result of that, they shape our world. And these are our worldviews, right? And I'll get into more detail as we move along. So why don't we go ahead to the next slide, please? So these are all the internal factors. And I think the one on top there, when they talk about race, you know, I think race is a very, I don't think it's the appropriate term, even though it is used for different reasons by different people. I think color of skin would be more appropriate. But there we have it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one race, and that is the human race. But there it is. So race, age, right? National origin. In the case of the United States, as you all know, it is a country of immigrants. The only actual Native Americans are the Native Americans, right? Everybody else is an immigrant or the sons and daughters of immigrants. We also have ethnicity. And ethnicity, you know, varies also within the United States. And as you can see there, we have one identified as cultural diversity. So your unique culture, are you Polish American? Are you Italian American? Are you Mexican American? Are you British American? There are a lot of cultural aspects to our to diversity, right? Gender is another one. Sexual appearance, and of course, both your physical and mental abilities, right? These are all integral parts of your internal identity. These are things that you cannot change for the most part. Gender is something that, you know, right now has come to the forefront, but for the most part, it is something that is it is not changeable, and it is something that you are born into. Next slide, please. And here's the external one, right? Your interests. As you grow older, right? When you're children, you're interested in different kinds of toys. As you grow older, your interests change, right? You may be interested in the environment. You may be interested in, chess. You may be interested in photography. Whole sets of issues. Education is another one where that can change, right? Over time as well. Appearance. Well, this is something that can change. When they say appearance, I think they mean the way that we dress more than the way that we look physically, right? Citizenship is another one that can change over time. Geographic location, family status. You know, we're all born single, obviously, and then over time we can either get married, we can get divorced, we can get separated. There are whole different types of family status that we can talk about. We can have small families, large families. Religion is another one. Relationship status is another one. And then, of course, experiences, right? Our experiences also form part of diversity. Next slide, please. This is the one that influences us a lot and shapes our perspective in many different ways. And so cultural events can influence us. Politics, of course. Everybody has his own his or her set of politics. And then your individual knowledge of history, right? Whether your focus is more Western history, Eastern history, a combination of all of it, world history. Depending on your world views, that is how you come to see the world. And part of this, of course, is culture. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I gave you in broad strokes what the big picture is on diversity. But I don't think, and this is the part that everybody has to think about this critically. Like, what do we mean when we say diversity? Not just cultural diversity, but diversity, period. And I think these few sentences here and the examples I'm going to give you will explain to you what is meant by diversity, really. And this is what, universities in the United States, companies in the United States, from the very big ones to the very small ones, aspire to. And again, this is aspirational, right? This is something that we've been trying since the times of when we came up with E Pluribus Unum, right? This is the United States, as most of you would agree, I think, is that the United States is a work in progress. We haven't reached utopia here when it comes to diversity. And every year, or every 5 years or every 10 years, and it's not a linear growth, right? There's setbacks, as we have seen fairly recently. But let's talk about what do we mean when we use the words diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? And as we go along, these words will become clear to you. So I gave some examples. Imagine you're at a party, right? So what does that mean? What does diversity mean in a party? So diversity, if we're talking about diversity, basically the bottom line is it invites you to the party. That's diversity, right? Every single person, whether you are, whatever your identities, whatever your different attributes and characteristics are, you get invited to the party. So that's diversity. Inclusion, in the context of a party, is that not only are you invited to the party, but inclusion invites you to dance at the party. So you're engaging, you're participating, you are included. You are not only standing there watching everybody else dance, but you yourself are dancing. And then of course, the final part, and the most important part in my view, is equity. And in equity, when you talk about equity, that means fairness, right? Equalness. Basically, that means equity redistributes space and resources so that you, as an invited guest, can also host your own party, right? So you are, not only are you included, but you are participating in your own way at the party, right? So that's one example. Let's go to the next slide, please, and I'll explain this further. Let's say you are in a room. Maybe it's a meeting in an office. Maybe it's a meeting in school. Maybe it is, I don't know, a conversation club at Esquina Franklin somewhere in Mexico. So what is diversity in that context? Well, diversity asks who is in the room, right? How many people do we have in this room? How many are there? 9? Okay. What kind of people do we have? Men, women? How many of them are from Aguascalientes? How many are from Colima? How many are from Nayarit? How many are from Pachuca? How many are from Chiapas, etc.? So that's diversity. That's the basic question. But inclusion asks a very important question. Not only who is in the room, but we're imagining, like I said, this is a meeting. This is either a meeting in an office or in an organization or in an Esquina Franklin. Exclusion says or asks, who has a seat at the table? Right? That's key. And of course, equity then asks, who is trying to get into the room but cannot? Or whose presence in the room is under constant threat of being erased? Those are very important questions. So diversity is not only about your presence. It is, do you have a seat at the table? Are you participating? And 2, most important, if you're not in the room, you're trying to get into the room, but you can't. Why? Or you are in the room and maybe you're even at the table, but then the dynamic is such that you are always under threat of being pushed away from the table. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here's another example, having the conversation or having a conversation. Let's say there's a group of people, right? Again, same situation, whether you're seated at a table in an office, or you're at a company, or you're in a Esquina Franklin. The first question that diversity asks is, how many different voices are there, right? So we'll have the voice of Elena, the voice of Julio, the voice of Pepe, and they're all from different states, and one's a woman, one's a man. And so they have there's a whole variety of factors or characteristics, right? But that's the basic question. How many voices? How many different voices? Inclusion asks the important question, has everyone's ideas been heard? That is the crucial fact about diversity. It's not only how many voices there are, but has everyone's ideas been heard? And the final one, equity, which is the all-important one, is whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they are in the minority. What conditions maintain certain groups as the majority? These are important questions to ask when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity. Think about that. These are important questions. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we come to then the most important aspect. We've talked about 3 different contexts, right? At the party, the conversation, and then in a room. But so what's the difference, right? And here it is. What is diversity here when we talk about it broadly speaking? And it's basically the presence of a wide range of human. I'm glad they used the word human because, and that's what I said when I said in the beginning that talking about race is not very helpful given that we're all human beings and we're all one race. Yes, there are differences in color, skin color, physical attributes, ethnicity, etc. But we're all human beings, right? So there's a wide range of human qualities and attributes. And these are both visible and invisible, right? And it's all within a group, an organization, or a society, or in the case of the United States, a country, which is also a society, right? And so that is the basic essence of diversity. So when we move from diversity to inclusion, we're saying that we are creating an environment where these people, all these diverse people, have both the feeling, and this is important, it's not just the feeling, but the reality that they actually believe that they belong and that they are able to reach their full potential, their individual full potential, which may be different from the full potential of other people who are equally diverse, right? And equity, then, is the condition of being fair, right? Inclusive and respectful, right? You are recognizing and acknowledging differing needs and expectations. All of us, because we are diverse, have different needs. We don't have the same needs. We have completely different needs based on the diversity among us, or if we're talking about two individuals between us. And not only differing needs, but also differing expectations. And equity acknowledges, and this is the most important part, it acknowledges the fact that equal treatment does not always yield equal results. That means that my needs are different from Pepe's. Pepe's needs are different from Alma. Alma's needs are different from someone else, and their expectations are different. And because their needs are different and their expectations are different, the results are different and will not be equal. Because, again, we are a diverse group. And so this is something that we really need to bear in mind. Let's go to the next slide here. So, benefits of diversity. Why bother with diversity? Before I get to this list, you can look at it while I'm talking to you, but let me also say this, that if you experience diversity in your life, your everyday life, you will have regular exposure to people, cultures, traditions, and practices that are different from your own, especially if you choose to go to the United States to study. Because in the United States, as you all know, it's a country of immigrants. You are going to see differences in cultures, differences in traditions, differences in practices, depending on who it is that you meet in school. You might even meet international students, obviously. And that is another set of diverse folks when it comes to education. So by engaging with all these people, you will learn skills to communicate and interact with these different communities and concepts that you are unfamiliar with. And that third aspect, or the third type of diversity, your worldview will change in all kinds of different ways. that you can't even begin to imagine right now. But every person that I've spoken to who goes to the United States to study, when they come into contact with Americans or with international students there, that is what happens, right? So all these things, what language you speak, what is your religion, what holidays do you celebrate, what is your racial identification, which I think is a misnomer. I think it should be more color of skin than anything else. What is your ethnic identity? And cultural, when we talk about cultural diversity, it is, what is your culture? Yeah, and what is culture? Culture is what shapes us. It shapes our identity and influences our behavior. And for lack of a better word, culture is our way of being. And more specifically, it refers to the shared language, beliefs, values, norms, behaviors, and material objects even that are passed down from one generation to the next, right? You get it from your parents got it from their parents got it from their parents. That is what is handed down culturally, right? In the United States, just to give you an idea, when they talk about racial composition, this was, of course, the census that was taken in 2009. And according to the census, 80% of the population is white. Well, what does that mean, 80% white? Well, they could be Russian Americans, Italian Americans, British Americans, all kinds of different cultures, right? 13% African American. Now, not all African American groups are the same. You have some who are from the South, so they're different variety. You know, a person from Louisiana is different from another person from Alabama or from Mississippi. 5% Asian. And these are very, very, they're not, what does that mean, Asian? Are they Chinese American? Are they Indian American? Are they Sri Lankan American? We don't know. But these are and I guess in the United States, I guess by now, in the 200 years plus that we have existed as a country, I think there's pretty much every single ethnicity or a person of every single national origin there can be, probably. We even have, of course, 1% Native American, and then 0.2% Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. So these are all the breakdowns of that. But let me go back to the question. So what does it mean to be culturally diverse? And here, the word multiculturalism comes to mind, right? It's because it's used, the term culturally diverse is often used interchangeably with this concept of being multicultural. I won't go into, the total breakdown of all of that. But this is how culture is handed down from father to son or to daughter, and then from son and daughter to their sons and daughters, and so on and so forth. But let's get into the benefits of diversity. Why is diversity good? And here are some examples of why diversity is a great thing. It increases creativity. Different cultural perspectives can inspire creativity and drive innovation. And I think there's no better example than Steve Jobs. He is a Syrian by national origin, came to the United States and as an immigrant, and look at the creativity and innovation he showed in creating, the iPhone, for example, right? Also, we talk about increased productivity. Diverse teams are more productive and perform better. If you talk about business, we can talk about increased profitability, because if you have a diverse team that knows the local market and has insight, right, they can make that particular business more competitive and profitable, right? For personal reasons and for professional reasons, the benefits of diversity are incredible. It increases your personal and your professional growth. In fact, if you are to become a global citizen, in other words, if you want to work for a global company, you have to have a global mindset. And that requires, again, diversity, right? And the only way you get to do that is by increasing, diversity brings about increased personal and professional growth. And this one, I think, is the most important. It reduces fear and it improves performance. Fear is the biggest impediment to engaging, right? We've seen this across since back in the days of the civil rights movement, right? And the last one here, I think, is very, very important. Again, if you have a global mindset, a culturally diverse talent pool, that means the people who are applying for a particular job or who work for a particular organization, to attract and retain the best talent, you have to instill this concept of diversity, which means not only diversity for diversity's sake, but inclusion and equity. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, of course, there are the positive attributes of diversity, and then there are challenges associated with diversity. The first one, I'm sure many of you can understand very clearly. Colleagues from some cultures may be less likely to let their voices be heard, right? Let's take an example. When I used to teach English many moons ago, and I had two different types of groups in my class. I had Japanese students and I had Latino students. Well, the Latino students had no problem raising their hand, asking questions. But with the Japanese students, it was more a group dynamic. They needed to first collaborate amongst themselves and then ask the question as a group. So who do you think got their voices heard more in that class? Well, yes, the Latino students, more so than the Japanese students, right? That's a clear example of how that can happen without you wanting it to happen, by the way, right? So remember, many of these, and this is something I should mention, of course, there is conscious bias or prejudice, right? But for the most part, this is all either unconscious bias or subconscious bias that is based because of our culture, the fears that have been instilled in us by our parents, our grandparents, our societies, right? Because of fear of the unknown. So this is something that could be a challenge. Another one, integration across multicultural teams can be difficult. And this is especially difficult when you are faced with prejudice or negative cultural stereotypes. And we know this has happened in every country, right? Not only in the United States, but every country experiences this kind of challenge when it comes to diversity. In Mexico, it's the same thing. I mean, in Mexico also, if you look at the fabric of Mexico, there is a lot of diversity in this country based on what part of the country you come from, or what your ethnicity is even, the color of your skin, your culture varies depending on what part of the country you come from. Even your food differs, right? Another thing that can be a challenge if you're working for a multinational company, professional communication can be misinterpreted, or it may be difficult to understand if people don't speak the same language and are not from the same culture, right? I myself I'll give you a perfect example. When I got married, um, my wife is from a different culture than I am from. And yes, there can be difficulties understanding um, why people do certain things. And she had the same issues with me in the beginning. We've been married now for 18 years, so I guess we now understand each other. But yes, those are issues that you will confront when you deal and participate in multicultural and diverse settings, especially if you decide to go and study in the United States or work for an international company. That is what you are likely to face. And these are challenges, right? You have to be able to navigate um, these differences, right? And your interpersonal skills have to be, you have to improve your interpersonal skills and not react negatively when something doesn't fit your pattern of thinking. That doesn't mean that pattern of thinking is less than yours. It's just different, right? This is one I'm sure all of you can associate with: navigating visa requirements, employment laws, and the cost of accommodating workplace requirements. If you are an employer and you have a disabled person who wants to come work for your company, well, there are some costs, right, associated with that. The doorways have to be wider so that a wheelchair can go through. In the United States, we already have laws for this, that you cannot have a work environment that does not allow for these accommodations. You have to expend the money to do this. Here, when you apply to go to the United States to study, I'm sure you'll be faced with visa requirements that you have to meet, right? And of course, again, if you start working for a company where there are where there's a diverse group of people, there are different understandings of professional etiquette, even. And there are different working styles. Yeah, some people work in groups. Some people like to work on their own. Nobody's saying that one is better than the other. Sometimes for some activities, group work is better when you work as a team. In some cases, working as an individual is better because you get to do, and especially if you are an expert in that field, that is something that you are an expert on, and therefore maybe one person is sufficient. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is one of my favorite sayings by a person, and this is the person, A. Philip Randolph. I hope people know about him. He is of the same ilk as Martin Luther King. In fact, Martin Luther King was not the person who decided or organized the March on Washington. It was Mr. Philip Randolph. And what he said is very true. And this applies also to diversity. It's not only freedom and justice, because I think they're one and the same. Freedom is never granted. It is won. And justice is never given. It is exacted. And what does exacted mean? It means it is demanded and obtained. You have to demand it and obtain it by demanding it, right? Similarly with diversity. Diversity is that important that you need, this is very applicable, right? When we talk about freedom and justice, and I'll leave it at that for you to think about this expression. And if you want to get more involved and learn about how this person came to say this, he was an African-American civil rights campaigner, as I put down on the screen there. Google him, look him up on a search engine on the internet, and find out how influential he was and why he came to think about freedom and justice in these terms. I think about I think about cultural diversity in the same terms. Next slide, please. And this is also my all-time favorite. Unfortunately, nobody knows who said this, but it's an anonymous saying, but it is so true. Diversity is the one true thing we all have in common, right? Because we're all different. Even among Mexicans, or among Americans. I mean, we're all immigrants, even in Mexico, right? We have immigrants in this country as well. And this is a diverse country as well, Mexico is. So we should celebrate diversity. And it is something that we should not only not only tolerate, but celebrate. So I leave you with these thoughts, and I wanted to leave some time here for some questions. So why don't we go to the question session now?
Yes, Sandeep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. So we have our first question.
Mm-hmm.
And Alexia is asking, what is your advice for those who are going to enroll in a university in the United States in terms of avoiding prejudice about diversity?
Listen, if we look at what has been happening not only in the United States, but in Europe, and in fact across the world, globalization and globalism and diversity, and I said this at the very beginning, right? It's not a linear progression that, oh, we're just going to improve on diversity day after day after day after day. No, there are going to be setbacks. Again, when we talked about majority and minorities, right? This all comes down to your interpersonal skills. How do you navigate adversity, right? There are going to be people who are not going to be accepting, and that's everywhere. That can be in the United States, that can be in Europe, that can be here in Mexico. Just the same way as you address the issue here, right? The best way to do that is by talking, communicating. The most of the time when people do that is because it's out of fear of the unknown. They don't know any better. So the instant reaction, or because of their culture, by what has been handed down by mama and papa and grandfather and grandmother, right? That's the reaction that some people have. But again, if you are open, and this is also in your case, what your culture has brought you a certain way. There are things that you think are right. There are certain things that you think are wrong based on how you were brought up by your parents. But I ask you to keep an open mind, reach out to people while you're in school. Don't stay isolated, engage, yeah? Make your voice be heard. You are a valuable member of that community. You have a voice, exercise it, yeah? Put yourself out there and take that uncomfortable step. Sometimes, yes, it may feel uncomfortable to, talk to a group that you have not talked to before. I've done it. It's hard in the beginning, especially when I was 15, 16, I was very shy. It was very hard for me till I discovered once I became a teacher. I became a teacher when I was 16, and teaching broke that for me, from being a shy person to being an outward person. So now when I go into a room, or I go into a classroom, or I go into a meeting, and I've never met anybody in that room before, but I go out there and I meet them. You stretch out your hand and say hello, and then let the conversation follow. So take that first step. Be the initiator, always. And just because you had a negative experience with one person, please don't make that an excuse to say, oh, all people like that are bad. That's my answer.
Awesome. So the second question is related also. I think you answered in some way, Sandeep, the second question.
Okay.
That is, Could you give any recommendations to international students of what we can do in order to integrate ourselves in the multicultural US university environment?
Yeah, I mean, reach out. There are many, many groups that are looking for, you know, whether it's a chess club or whether it is a dance club or whether it is a book club. Join these different clubs. There are many, many, there are hundreds of clubs. Be careful when you join fraternities because that's a different thing. Unless you're, you know, committed. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but there's more of a commitment involved. You want to focus on your studies as well. Fraternities are a different, and you know, for some people it makes sense. So use your judgment, right? See what works for you, what doesn't work for you. For you. But yes, go out there, put yourself out there. You go to the student union. Every university has a student union, and they have this big bulletin board, where they say, oh, you know, group of students who love poetry will be meeting at such and such cafe on Fridays at 5 o'clock. Go, join that club and make friends, right? That is the whole idea of going to college in a different country, is to make that an enriching experience for you. Meet as many people as you can, not just Americans, but others. That's why Americans love it when they go to the universities and they have students from other countries, right? Reach out to them and make friends. This is a new experience for you. Take advantage of it. Squeeze every last drop out of that lemon.
That's awesome advice, Sandeep. Thank you. And okay, we finished our question session.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay, and we are on time right now, so it's
okay.
Awesome. And well, it was very interesting information, and sometimes we listen to the word diversity and we have an idea, right? Or maybe an idea or a concept in our minds, but it is more than that idea or concept. And
absolutely.
Yeah, by you sharing this to all of us and also your perspective as an American. So it is very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing all this useful and interesting information with us.
Pleasure. The pleasure.
Yes, and well, thank you to all of you guys. I'd like to share that tomorrow we're going to have another webinar. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, great. Okay, hold on, please. To show you. Okay. Who's there laughing?
I know, I just heard that.
No. Okay, so tomorrow we're having our webinar related to gender equity in US higher education.
Good.
Yes, so we invite all of you to attend this interesting talk. This is going to be a panel. This is going to be a panel with 3 university experts. So it's going to be very interesting. Hope to see you, all of you there. Yes, and well, thanks to all of our attendees also for your attendance, and hope to see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. There's a link for registration as well. And thank you also to my Education USA colleagues who are here also, and who have been also organizing this series of webinars. So Sandeep, thank you again for your presence and for sharing this information. Thank you all. And
thank you, Sandeep. Can you stay for 1 minute so we can just take a screenshot from the team?
Okay. Sure.
I think we are almost. Let me see.
All of us.
Yes. Okay.
Perfect.
Elvira and Danny, can you turn on your cameras, please?
So Elvira is our country coordinator, Sandeep. Elvira Castillo.
Okay, good. Nice to meet you.
I think
Yes.
we met in the embassy
We did.
reunion. It was a lot of people. So.
Yes. Very right.
And thank you, Sandy. This session was great. I really like it.
You know,
and
it would be better if we could, and I've tried, it doesn't work usually because you never know who's the